The moment I saw the number on my screen, something inside me went very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before tears. The kind that comes after you've already understood something you can't undo. My checking account. The one I'd been building for 3 years. The one I never touched, never transferred from, never even mentioned at family dinners, because I didn't want anyone asking why I was saving so hard or what it was for. $41,280. Gone. Not withdrawn. Not transferred to savings. Just gone. The balance on my screen read $12.47. I remember sitting down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. My legs just stopped working and the floor was there. My son was in the next room watching something on his tablet. I could hear the cartoon sounds, the little laugh track, his occasional giggle. He was 7. He didn't know what that money was for. He didn't know that I'd been putting away every spare dollar for 2 years so that a specialist in Montreal could look at his spine and maybe give us options that our local hospital couldn't. He just knew that his back hurt sometimes and that I told him it was going to get better. I had a meeting in 40 minutes. I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent the last 8 years tracking other people's financial crimes, embezzlement, tax fraud, hidden assets, and divorce proceedings. I know exactly what a money trail looks like. I know exactly how people hide things and where they slip up. I say this not to sound impressive, but because what happened next still embarrasses me. Because the person who drained my account wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a hacker, it was my sister. And I had given her the access myself. Let me go back, because if I don't explain it properly, you'll think I was stupid. And maybe I was. But I want you to understand the particular kind of stupid that comes from loving someone for 30 years and never quite believing they'd cross that line. My sister is 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who sat with me when I had nightmares, who drove me to the hospital at 2 a.m. when I was 19 and thought I was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be a panic attack from a bad exam week. She knew things about me that no one else knew. She was the person I called when my marriage ended. She held my hand in the hospital when my son was born. She had also, over the years, made some choices that I'd quietly been covering for. The credit card debt that I paid off for her in 2019 because she was getting back on her feet. The rent I floated for 3 months in 2021 when her boyfriend left and she couldn't make the gap. The grocery runs, the car repair, the phone bill. I never kept a total. I didn't want to. She was my sister, and she needed help, and I helped her. That's what you do. Last November, she called me with a proposition. She'd been offered a contract position doing bookkeeping for a small property management company in Hamilton, but she needed to prove she had access to some working capital to secure a business account. Could I add her to my checking account? Just temporarily, just so the paperwork went through? She'd remove herself in 2 weeks once the contract was signed. I said yes. I know. In my defense, and yes, I know how this sounds, coming from someone whose job is literally to catch financial fraud, I wasn't thinking about her as a risk. I was thinking about her as my sister. There is a part of your brain that simply does not apply the same analysis to the people you love that it applies to strangers. I've since talked to a therapist about this, and she told me it's actually very common and has a name, but I still feel like an idiot. I added her to the account on a Tuesday. By the following Friday, I had $12.47. The transfers happened over 3 days. Small ones at first, $200 here, $150 there, the kind of amounts that don't trigger automatic alerts. Then 2 larger ones on Thursday. Then one enormous one, $28,000, and a single transfer to an account I didn't recognize at 4,047 in the morning while I was asleep. I found out Friday morning when I sat down to pay my son's school fees online. I called her immediately, straight to voicemail. I texted, nothing. I called our mother, who said she hadn't heard from her in a few days, which wasn't that unusual. I called her best friend, who said she thought my sister had mentioned going somewhere, but she wasn't sure where. By Saturday, she had blocked me on everything. Here is where I should tell you that I panicked, that I cried, that I fell apart. And I did, a little, on Friday night after my son went to sleep. I sat in my car in the driveway and I let myself have about 20 minutes of pure grief. Not just for the money, for her, for whatever version of her I had apparently been choosing to see instead of the real one. And then I went inside and I opened my laptop. I know how financial fraud works. I know how to follow money and I know how people think they can hide it. My sister is smart, but she is not forensic accountant smart. She is smart in the way that assumes no one is going to look too hard. I was going to look very hard. The first thing I did was pull every transaction detail I could access through my bank's portal. The transfers had gone to 3 different accounts. The large one at 4047 a.m. went to an account registered to a numbered company, which sounds sophisticated until you realize that registering a numbered company in Ontario takes about 40 minutes online and costs $200. The smaller transfers went to what looked like a personal account. I noted the last 4 digits that appeared in the transfer reference. Then I called the bank's fraud line, not the regular customer service line, the fraud line. I told them I had not authorized these transactions, that I had reason to believe the authorized secondary account holder had misused her access, and that I needed to speak with someone in the financial crimes unit. I used the right language. I stayed calm. The person I spoke to, I could tell, was not used to fraud victims who already knew what questions to ask. They flagged the account and opened an investigation within the hour. Then I called a friend of mine who works in financial compliance and asked her, very casually, whether she knew anyone at the RCMP's financial crimes unit. She did. She sent me a name. In the meantime, I started thinking about where my sister might have gone. She didn't have a passport, or at least she hadn't had one the last time the subject came up, which was 2 years ago at our cousin's destination wedding that she couldn't afford to attend. But people can get passports. I didn't know. What I did know was that she had mentioned, maybe 6 months ago, a friend she'd reconnected with who lived in Vancouver. She talked about visiting someday. She'd also talked, more recently, about how tired she was of Hamilton, how she wanted a fresh start, how she felt like her life was suffocating her. I had listened and been sympathetic. I had told her she deserved a fresh start. I had meant it. On Sunday morning, 48 hours after I discovered what she'd done, my phone rang. It was her. I answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She started screaming before I could even speak. She was screaming that her card had been declined, that the account had been frozen, that she didn't know what I had done, but I needed to fix it, that she had expenses and commitments and I was ruining her life. She said, and I am going to remember this sentence for the rest of my life. She said that I had always been jealous of her and this was just my way of controlling her. I let her finish. Then I said, very quietly, "Where are you?" She didn't answer. I said, very quietly, "Where are you?" She didn't answer. I said, "I know what you did. I have the transfer records. I have the timestamps. I've already spoken to the bank's fraud unit and I've been in contact with the RCMP. What I need you to understand right now is that the account you moved the money into has been flagged. The funds are not accessible, and the investigation is already open." Silence. "Then you called the police on me?" I said. "I reported a fraud." "Yes." She started crying. The screaming turned into crying, and the crying turned into explanations, justifications, reasons. She owed someone money, not a bank, a person, a bad situation she'd gotten into months ago and hadn't told me about. She was scared. She thought she could pay it back before I noticed. She thought she could pay it back before I noticed. She thought the contract job would come through. She hadn't planned it this way. I'd heard variations of this before. Not about theft, but about debt, about mistakes, about bad decisions she'd made and needed someone to absorb the consequences of. This time I didn't absorb it. I said, "You took money I was saving for Eli's spinal treatment. He's 7 years old and his spine is compressing and that money was going to Montreal, so a specialist could tell me if there was something we could do before the window closes. You knew that. I told you about Montreal. I showed you his last MRI report." She went quiet in a different way than before. I said, "I'm not unfreezing anything. I'm not calling anyone. I'm not fixing this. The investigation will proceed. If you want to talk to me again after that process is finished, we can talk." And I hung up. I will not pretend the next few weeks were easy. They were not. My mother called me 7 times in 1 week, cycling between asking me what had happened and gently suggesting that maybe I was being too hard on my sister. That family was family. That surely there was a way to sort this out privately. I love my mother. I understand that watching 2 of her children in this situation was painful for her, but I had been sorting things out privately for years, and the result was that my son's medical fund was gone. I was not doing that again. The bank investigation confirmed what I already knew. My sister had transferred the funds deliberately and in stages, a method consistent with structuring to avoid automatic fraud alerts. The numbered company account was traced to her address. She had registered it, it turned out, 2 weeks before she approached me about being added to my account. She had planned this, not impulsively, not out of desperation in the moment. She had planned it in advance, which is somehow worse, and also made the case significantly more straightforward. The RCMP contact my friend had connected me with was thorough and businesslike. She told me that, given the amount involved, the premeditation, and the fact that my sister had crossed provincial lines, this was being treated seriously. She asked me detailed questions. I gave her detailed answers. I provided every document I had. My sister was located in Vancouver. She had been staying with that friend she'd mentioned. When investigators made contact, her friend apparently immediately produced receipts, emails, texts. She had not been entirely in the dark about where the money had come from, and she wanted very much not to be involved. My sister hired a lawyer. There were months of process that I won't fully detail because some of it is still ongoing, and also because the specifics aren't the part of this story I want to focus on. What I will tell you is that the funds were substantially recovered through a restitution order. Not all of it immediately, but enough, and with a payment structure attached, that I was able to reschedule the Montreal appointment. I want to tell you about that appointment. Eli has a condition called adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, except that it presented earlier than typical, and the curvature has been progressing faster than his local orthopedic specialist was comfortable managing without a second opinion. The Montreal doctor is one of 12 people in the country who does the specific type of minimally invasive intervention that might slow the progression without major surgery. Getting an appointment takes months. Getting there with travel and accommodation and the consultation fees not covered by provincial insurance cost money we didn't have until I'd saved it. We flew out on a Tuesday in March. Eli had never been on a plane before. He spent the whole flight with his nose against the window, pointing out clouds like he was narrating a nature documentary. He asked me if we could see our house from up here. I told him not quite. The specialist was a small, precise woman with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that made Eli immediately trust her. She looked at his imaging. She asked him questions directly, not through me, which he found very grown-up. She explained what she was seeing in terms he could mostly follow. She told us there was a window, not infinite but real. She had a plan. On the way back to the hotel, Eli held my hand and said, out of nowhere, "Mom, is my back going to be okay?" I told him yes, and for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. I thought a lot about what I would have done differently, not with my sister. I couldn't have predicted she'd go this far, and I refused to spend my life assuming the worst of everyone I love. But maybe I would have set up a dedicated account for Eli's medical fund that no one else ever knew about. A separate institution, a separate login, something completely siloed from my regular finances. I've done that now. I do that now for anything that matters. My sister and I have not spoken since that phone call. My mother eventually stopped asking me to reach out. I don't know if she came to understand or just came to accept. Either way, she stopped, and I'm grateful for that. I don't hate my sister. I don't think hate is the right word for what I feel when I think about her, which is a complicated mixture of grief and clarity and something I can only call relief. Relief that I finally stopped covering for her. Relief that I stopped mistaking loyalty for love. Relief that when it mattered most, when it was my son's health, his spine, his chance at a better outcome, I stopped being the nice, accommodating little sister and I became the person who follows the money until she finds the truth. Eli started wearing his brace last month. He calls it his robot suit. He wears it to school, which I was worried about, but his friends thought it was interesting for about 3 days, and now it's just part of him. His teacher sent me a message saying he'd explain the whole thing to his class during sharing time, very matter-of-factly, and one of his classmates had asked if he had superpowers. He told her he was working on it. I think about that sometimes when the grief about my sister comes back, which it does, less often now, but still. I think about my son in his robot suit, working on his superpowers, and I remember why I stopped being quiet about what was done to us. Some things are worth fighting for. I just had to stop fighting for the wrong things first.